This episode is brought to you by Roundtable Group, the experts on experts. We've been connecting attorneys with experts for over 25 years. Find out more at roundtablegroup.com.
Welcome to Discussions at the Roundtable. I'm your host, Noah Balmer, and today I'm excited to welcome Craig Schlumbohm. Mr. Schlumbohm is the president of Pacific Construction Analysts, Inc., a full-service construction consulting firm which provides construction management, site development, and construction forensic services. He specializes in post-mortem cost analysis of construction projects, and he is a sought-after expert witness in the construction field. Mr. Schlumbohm holds a BS in civil engineering from San Diego State. Craig, thank you so much for joining me here today on Discussions at the Roundtable.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let's jump into it. You've had an incredible amount of expertise in civil engineering. Has this always been a passion for you? How'd you get started?
Definitely wasn't a passion. It's kind of interesting. I was that kid in grade school and middle school that was getting straight C's, never really took anything too seriously. As a kid, I had real serious I don't know what they call it now. It's attention deficit disorder, and sometime around the middle of high school, I realized, I didn't want to sell French fries. So, I better kind of find something I liked. And, I was always good with my hands, always liked trying to figure out how things worked. So I went the engineering field and even, through, college, worked on learning and worked on how to learn and got better and better over the years. And, so it was an interesting challenge coming from that kid who couldn't sit still in a chair for 5 minutes to what I do today.
Sure. And what you do is a pretty broad topic, right? Like your work has been extremely broad in scope. You've worked on projects from, I read, California's Legoland and single family homes, right? And everything in between. So what does it mean to be an expert in your field, and how do you remain an expert?
For me, it certainly changed. Early on in my career, right out of school, even when I was in college, I was working for grading and underground utility contractors. So the heavy side of construction. Sure. In Southern California, that industry really died. We're just not developing 5,000 acre parcels like we used to. So for me, a lot of the kind of the breadth of what we do, or what I do, changed simply because of the industry that I started in a large way died. So we still do some from that perspective, but we retooled in the, say 2005 to 2008 timeframe to really get more into the vertical construction side of things, just to survive.
So your expertise has changed as the industry has changed.
Correct. Had to, or I'd be very hungry today.
And how did you parlay all of that experience into a career, really, of expert witnessing? You've been doing that for a long time. Tell me about your very first engagement. Were you actively seeking it?
No. So I worked with the same company that I worked with that did Legoland. Guy by the name of Bill Boyd was a grading expert. As the contractor that I was working for at the time, was always in trouble, turned everything into a fight. And so even as a project manager working for that company, we were always in a fight. And they brought in a consultant on a project. This guy watched me at work and said, hey, this guy can fight his way out of a corner really well. Took me, hired me away, fortunately for me, because I was going crazy at the other place. And, really retooled me from a fighter to somebody who could basically analyze the parts of a problem and realize what it is that people fight over, and being able to evaluate that. So I took that knowledge really and really started using it. For that company, they had a variety of different kinds of cases, a lot of productivity analysis type projects, contract disputes, and really look at it from the perspective of, what it is to fight. What is it? Why is it that people fight? Break those components down. Why is it that people have disagreements? And frankly, having worked for a guy that was essentially a walking, lawsuit to begin with, I learned a lot. I learned what it was to, be that guy, or not myself, but I mean, to be working for that company that was always the ones that were causing problems. See that, analyze it, and we became really good at it. So ultimately, my first expert assignment came as a part of a case that Bill Boyd, who was my mentor, became ultimately my business partner. Minor aspects to cases where he was resolving the larger components. Some smaller components they needed some separate expertise on. I came in on that
Sure.
almost by accident.
So during that first engagement, what was the extent of that engagement? Did you, write a report? Did you have a deposition? Were you cross-examined?
So on the earliest one, when I was working for the grading contractors, there's very specific software that they use to compute earthwork volumes. So I had used that software a lot. Throughout the next 10 years or so, I used that software a lot. So I became kind of an expert in how one goes about calculating volumes for different kinds of projects. So really, my first 2 or 3 assignments, involved cases where Bill Boyd was the expert talking about the main components of the case, and I was really focused down on that specific question of how it is precisely that we do the computations. So, my first case ever was an arbitration.
Okay.
And I didn't even really know 2 weeks prior to the arbitration that they were just going to right at the end designate me. I'd done a lot of the background work. I'd been helping Bill prepare and everything else, but right at the end, the lawyer was like, "Hey, I think we need somebody that can really step in and talk about this." So it happened pretty organically, but somewhat pre-planned with my employment and ultimately taking over the reins for Bill.
So did you feel pretty prepared, when it was in your early going? Did the lawyers that you worked with do an adequate job preparing you for what was expected of you, what it would be like in that case, in arbitration, but also when you've gone to court? Have you been adequately prepared for that? Or have you, learned some things over the years that you wish you had known at the beginning?
That's a fun question. I think a lot of it has to do with simply how good the lawyer is. I think a good lawyer is going to have their experts be prepared. A great lawyer really works with their experts to prepare them for what's coming next. So I go back over my experience, and I really do think about it. There were some assignments very early on in my career that I actually had some very excellent preparation for, and everything went really smooth. There have been cases later in my career where I don't think the attorneys were doing a good job. I kept asking, what's the preparation going to look like? What do we need to do? What do we need to do to prepare? It didn't happen, and it was uncomfortable. Being in a case where the lawyer that you're working with asks you a question and you have no idea where they're even coming from, that's a tough
bad
position.
News.
That's bad news. So, a good attorney, does that preliminary workup. As an expert, if you're not getting that kind of support, I think you have to do it internally to try your best. But, sometimes if the attorney doesn't have a good handle on the case, it's hard for you to be a good expert.
Does that calculus enter into whether or not you take a case? Do you take most of the cases that you are offered? Some of them, all of them?
No, we don't take everything for sure. There have been firms where we've just drawn a line in the sand and basically said we're not going to work with them anymore. That just were asking us to do things that either we were uncomfortable with, or they had unreasonable expectations.
Can you give me any without naming names? Can you give me any specifics of a time that you were either asked to do something unreasonable or that was beyond your scope? Anything like that?
Sometimes when you're out there looking at a complex, you're looking at a building, whatever the case may be, and a lawyer looks at you and says, "Hey, I read your report, but there aren't any roofing problems." Well, right, we were on the roof and we didn't see any problems. Oh, I need some roofing problems so we can go get the roofer in the case.
Wow, that blunt, huh?
that blunt, and that's a firm that we don't work with anymore. I had an attorney in one case, basically asked me for an allocation, and I was very uncomfortable working with that allocation. I didn't think it was right, and that case went to trial, and the judge asked me the judge, throughout the questioning and everything else, the judge just cut right through the chase and said, "Hey, where did you come up with this calculation?" I said, "I didn't. I did the calculation that the attorney asked me to do." He said, "That's the only thing that calculation represents?" I said, "Yes, that's it." So as an expert, you have to be honest. The worst thing you can get doing is lying. There are judges. Judges remember. And in that case, I was really uncomfortable, but I think the judge saw the writing on the wall that I was being honest. I didn't do that calculation. I did the math, but it wasn't the math I wanted to do. And when it came time to answer for that math, I said, "Yeah, all I did was the math."
Is that a position that you find yourself in frequently?
No.
Good.
Yeah, exactly. No, that was one instance of one attorney that was just in a lot of trouble on a case, and I didn't work for him anymore.
So you are then vetting attorneys. What is that initial engagement like? So you get a call, and what sorts of questions do you ask? How do you vet the attorney to make sure, this is a case? Do you get, any paperwork? Do you get a rundown of what the action is? Or are they just saying we need some information about some technical details? What is that process typically like?
It depends. A lot of times a lot of our work is repeat law firm, repeat customer, so to speak. So in those, I think they know what we know and we know what they know, kind of thing. We do get assignments that we don't know the people. We've had a couple through Roundtable where people have come to us and said, "Hey, we've got a case. We need to make sure that you fit into maybe working with this attorney." And you need to learn about the case. You need to learn about whether or not you're comfortable with the issues. There are times where my expertise is pretty broad, but there's some times where I've had to tell attorneys, "Hey, thank you for calling me, but I might not be the right guy because I'm not that expert in, fill in the blank, a certain, subspecialty or something like that." I think it's going through the process, trying to understand what the case is about, at least initially. Obviously, the parties involved are important. There are times when obviously people know about conflict checking and things like that, or at least hopefully they do. There have been times where we've looked at a case and said, we're not too excited about going up against a certain individual named in the case or representing lawyers, things like that. We've turned them down for that, but it's trying to find out as much as you can about the case and seeing if you really think that you're a good fit. It's been rare. It's been really rare that in those early meetings that we've ever felt uncomfortable with the law firm, that felt that there might be a working relationship problem. It's happened, but normally it's later down the road where some things happen and it's just not a good team effort. But in the early stages, it's just really trying to find out what you can about the project and whether or not the specifics of what they're looking for that you really fit into that mold.
So there's not a ton you can do at the outset to make sure you don't find yourself in the position where you might have to do some quote unquote calculations that aren't quite, what you want to say or what you want to do, or being asked to do something unethical. In other words, that typically happens after it's, quote unquote, too late, right?
Yeah, gut feel comes into play. But, the two times where I was probably put in that weird corner, I would say both times were for law firms that I had done a number of cases with. So it wasn't right out of the gate that I was put into that weird position. So to me, it's telling the lawyers what they need to know as early as you know it. I mean, one of my mantras has always been, when I get involved in a case, if my lawyers don't know something, or I think that they're cruising for a bruising in a case, they're gonna lose. Whatever as quick as I can report that information to them, the better, so that we don't find ourselves down the road 8 months, a year later, fighting a really bad case, unless there may have been a reason to do it. They
Sure.
may know that they had a bad case, and, especially on the defense side, is you may have a bad case, but you need to put up a fight. That happens. But, as quick as people can find out what and what your initial feelings are, the better. It avoids the uncomfortable, situations later.
Sure. Craig, do you have any interesting stories, cases that you've worked on that you'd like to share?
They're all interesting. No, I mean, it's really funny because, we've seen experts, that you've met with, say you're working on a case, and, and again, kind of missing the details of who we're talking about here, talking really broad terms. A lot of times a group of experts from different companies come together to represent the same client, and they each have separate expertise. It kind of goes back to what I just said about speaking your mind and your truth from day one. We were involved in a case where we had multiple experts from multiple companies, and there was a linchpin in the case, and there was an expert that really spoke to that one scientific topic. And in his deposition, and this was an arbitration case, in deposition and arbitration, that expert said some things that we'd not heard from him before.
Interesting.
And after a lot of meetings and a lot of conversations, regarding aspects related to a building, for the first time, he started talking about different components, and there were structural issues on a building. And we had heard him say things about, well, maybe this was a problem. And it sort of beat us up pretty good as an expert team, because then we're all sitting back and had to recover, because on that one, I was dealing with some of the architectural issues and costs of repair, and suddenly my foundation fell apart because the building foundation fell apart because of the way the case went on from there. So it really hurt the team, group of experts. We had different experts on structure, on windows, on roofs, different. It kind of shot the whole thing out of the water, because we had an expert that, for whatever reason, just kind of went a different direction.
That's interesting. Is vetting the other experts something that typically happens? Like, do you know your team A, and do you know who you're up against B?
Usually, yes. And most of the good attorneys make sure that the experts on the same team are talking, because the last thing you want is kind of what I just described, where everybody's building off of somebody else's foundation, and then that foundation crumbles. And again, if the foundation wasn't there to begin with, that's fine. We never want to be, untruthful. We always want to be telling the truth. We always want to be using good scientific principles. But when one of those experts kind of, yanks one of the Lego pieces out of the tower, and suddenly the whole tower is ready to fall over, it puts you in a difficult position. So I can't remember ever being in a case where I looked at the rest of the experts and said, this is not something I'm interested in. I mean, most guys are good. I think the more fun part about that is sometimes you work, with an expert, and then 2 weeks later you're doing another mediation, and you're on opposite sides. I mean, we see that a lot. We see that a lot. And actually I like that. I love sitting around and joking on a case, we're, doing some kind of testing, and, and last week you wanted to do it this way, but this week, hey, Joe, now you want to do it the other way. What gives? Oh, because you were plaintiff last week and your defense this week is, and kind of ribbing each other. In the construction side of things, most everybody came out of the construction industry. We've all been called horrible things. We've all had rocks thrown at us. So it might be a little different, scenario than, a lot of other, industries. I don't think doctors throw, organs at each other, that they just
but hey man, we don't know what goes on in the ER after.
I don't know, but a lot of the guys that I know, we've been down dirty holes together, in the mud and the muck, looking at different things, and and it's we all know what we look like when we've had a dirty day, climbing around
Sure.
on an investigation. And so, working with those people, with them and against them is actually, to me, kind of one of the things I relish. It's fun.
Do you ever, is it ever a problem where those friendships can kind of get in the way a little bit of taking, the opposing expert down a peg? Because at the end of the day, obviously you're each engaged by your own attorneys doing your job, but you might be contradicting each other. And does that, your camaraderie ever come into play there, or throw a wrench in it?
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
Yes. There's only, I guess my best way to answer that is I normally don't attack the expert. I attack principles or
Okay.
analysis or discovery. So I can tell somebody, Noah, I can tell you that your math was wrong.
Okay.
You made a mistake. That's different. You can handle that differently. You can say, hey, you know what? I looked at your analysis and I just don't think that it included the information that it should have included. I think it overreached here or there. I think you can delicately work around that, and not that you need to. I don't like coming out and name calling,
Right.
Anybody. It's happened once or twice where people, I think, just grossly overreached, but for the most part, I think we all act pretty professionally.
One thing I'd like to touch on before the show, we were talking about your experience as a juror and how that impacted the way that you view experts. And I think that our audience could benefit a little bit from that discussion.
I think everybody, when they get their jury summons in the mail, takes the first one and throws it in the trash. And then the second one, for some reason, because they're busy, that they can't possibly do jury duty. I learned a lot from jury duty. I was telling you that I was involved in a case dealing with a relatively minor theft from a Sears store. And they asked me to be the jury foreman. So I had some experience. We went around the room, talked about what everybody did. Everybody basically voluntold me that I was going to be the jury foreman in that case. Really interesting fact came up in the case regarding a witness and whether or not that witness had conversations with one of the defendants in the case. And it just came off very poorly. Everybody in the room knew this lady was lying because of her demeanor, her just all the signals that you get from a person that's lying. And so that was an issue. The other issue is two people that were supposed to not be friendly with each other. On an intermission, the entire jury walks out and looks down the hall, and there are these two people kind of, giggling and laughing and talking with each other. And so this notion that these two people hate each other, it felt very wrong. So really it came down to, for a lot of reasons other than the words that were spoken, a couple of the jury members really had a hard time with that. And really, it was interesting to be in the room and to hear the conversation of other people discussing why they thought a person was a liar. You know,
Mm-hmm.
not, you know, it was just strong words that were used. I mean, they really, two jurors especially really struggled with it. And the really, what it ultimately came down to is, you know, one of the jurors was not comfortable voting on innocence or guilt.
Okay.
And we ultimately had to go back and ask the judge one specific question. The judge responded. 3 minutes later, we took a vote and convicted the person. So it's really interesting how, you know, little things can be said or done in the courtroom that really foster a feeling of, you know, untruth. You know, it's hard. This lady was lying, and everybody knew it. And so for me, I focused back, and I did jury duty other time. One other, I mean, really quick, just comment, you know, there was an expert on a DUI case. Nobody believed her. She just was there because she was getting paid to be there. It's just really the way it felt. I love jury duty for that. I love being in there and really seeing from the perspective of, you know, not knowing all the details, not knowing all the characters, being able to see what is it that people say that make you believe them, but maybe more so, what kinds of things do people say that make people really not believe what's being said? And that to me is key.
So how do you integrate that into your expert witness practice? You know, what are the lessons that you take, you know, knowing how the jury might perceive you? How do you use that to improve your performance as an expert?
You know, people I know will stretch the truth on
Mm-hmm.
data, and you have to be really comfortable with your analysis, and you have to be comfortable with the fact that there are going to be people that are going to attack your analysis. And it's just knowing and being confident with the work that you've done, you know, being honest with yourself. If you're honest with yourself and you know you did competent analysis, yeah, people might be able to argue a point, but they can't really throw out the whole analysis. If they can get you down on one point, you know, you can, you know, even go so far as to, you know, I've just been honest when somebody pointed something out in my analysis and said, hey, do you really think that's the case? Well, I do. However, it's a minor component. And if you would disagree, you know, I'm willing to accept that we disagree on this.
Mm-hmm.
It's picking and choosing your battles. It's doing an analysis that you believe in, and knowing that analysis. I know a lot of experts rely on staff to do a lot of computations, and they get handed documents that they've not really always reviewed. That shows, that doesn't come off well when you don't know what's on a piece of paper and it has your, you know, your letterhead, you know, on the bottom.
Sure.
That's problematic to people. So it's really knowing the data, being comfortable with what you're going to present.
I imagine that would really come up during cross, right? When you're being grilled about your data, is knowing how not only, you know, the jury perceives you, but how the jury perceives you under pressure when pressed about
Right.
your data. Yeah, that's you know, that's a really interesting thing. I do want to pivot to one other thing before we end. This is something that I like to ask everybody. Is it important to you that the case is won? Do you care about the way that the case concludes? Is that something that comes into your calculus when you're deciding whether or not to choose a case if it's you know, if your side is likely to win?
The case in my career that I'm most proud of as an expert, I told the lawyers for my side in the first couple of days of being assigned the case that we were going to lose, and we were going to lose big. They knew it. We were defense, and we had to put up a fight. And the reality of the situation is we never shied away from the fact that our guy messed up. What we did want to point out is that they didn't mess up in a vacuum. There were other contributing factors that caused our client to stumble. Our guy stumbled, but they didn't stumble in a vacuum. And when you walk into a deposition knowing that you're going to get really difficult questions like, you know, Are you going to argue that your client didn't mess this up? No, you have to be honest. You have to know know your data set. Sure. I'm not going to sit here and say the guy didn't make a mistake. The guy made a mistake. But what we did at the end of the day on that case was got the other side to understand that there were 4 or 5 other parties that were also responsible and contributory to what had happened. And we ultimately were able to get to a position where instead of having to pay the whole thing, it got split up 5 ways, and not just to split it up. I mean, there were some serious problems. Our guy, messed up, but he messed up because somebody put the impediment in front of them to mess up. So knowing that that you have a strong case or a weak case, sometimes you can do a lot of good in the weak cases. So from that perspective, especially on the defense side, I think, you have to be, helpful to the process. Never hide from the fact that you might have some problems in your case, and maybe go so far as owning those problems. On the plaintiff side, sometimes that's a little more present, just from the simple fact that it's not that I'm keeping a scorecard.
Sure.
It's that at the end of the day, it can be really hard client control when on the plaintiff side, everybody looking at it's like this is a losing case. It gets hard to get paid on those cases. So really more so, not because of a expert, position, but more of a business administration, accounting, that comes into play sometimes. Just it's difficult. And on the construction side, a lot of other industries, a lot of other experts work with, big retainers, and it's a different beast on the construction side. So, that would be the only time that we'd shy away from, say, a potentially losing case would be because of the ability to get paid.
Right. Well, let's talk about, I guess I do want to point out to our listeners that does drive a point home that not every win is a win with a capital W. There's wins. Winning is a scale, right? And if paying less, or like you said, having contribution from a lot of different parties, that's another type of win. And on the defense side, it's getting the best outcome for your client. And it sounds like in that case, that was the best possible realistic outcome for your client. So that still is a win after a fashion.
Yeah, and that was an insurance case on defense, and the insurance company was thrilled that we paid policy limits.
And in your reputation, right? Like when you are a part of a case like that, I imagine that brings in more business.
That one did. Actually, to be honest with you, on that particular case, partway through the deposition, one of the attorneys leaned over to the attorney that I was working for and said, "Hey, before he goes out of here today, I want to make sure it's okay with you that I can approach you about another case that had actually very similar set of circumstances." It was a bad case. It was a losing case. It was just, let's lose a lot less than we might lose otherwise. Because at the end of the day, there are mistakes that are made in the construction industry. People make mistakes. And trying to say that your leaking building is just fine is insane. Arguing that our guy has zero liability a lot of times is insane. And I even like during expert meetings and things like that, we see this where these experts take this attitude. Our guy was perfect. Our guy didn't do anything wrong. It's like there's no way. There's no way. So taking that attitude doesn't do anybody any good. Doing that posturing doesn't do anybody any good. Whether you're in the room with your attorneys that you're working with, or you're in a room of experts both kind of with you and against you, be realistic. Own what the problems are, and it's a lot easier to get things settled.
Before I let you go, you did bring up getting paid, and that is a question that comes up. How do you bill? Are you a project-based business? Do you do hourly? Do you take a retainer? What's your typical? How do you recommend for people for experts to get paid on time and fairly?
It's funny because I've read some books and things like that on experts and how you should be an expert and how you do things. different industries and different disciplines of being an expert are very different. On the construction side, it's rare to have anything other than just say a nominal retainer, which we look at it really as just a kickoff fee more than anything else. Most companies, we've done a lot of work with insurance companies, they're not paying a retainer. That's not going to happen. So we can ask. After the 100th time in a row of being told no, we sort of abandoned it. A lot of times the insurance companies are very slow paying, but you get paid. It's, we had one law firm. It's public record, but we had one law firm. There was a San Diego-based law firm that filed bankruptcy and owed a lot of Southern California experts a lot of money. It wasn't just us. So it's difficult. You just have to make good business decisions. I didn't.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, but it sounds like by and large you've been pretty successful. Do you have any last advice to either experts or attorneys?
Like I said, it's been kind of a theme here we've been talking about the last couple minutes. Know your position and own it.
Sure.
And I know for attorneys, sometimes they have to, argue. They have to try to defend their client, and I understand that. But where your case is weak, you can spend a lot of time and energy trying to deflect what's really going on. But most people in the room know what's going on. So, when you look at the situation from the standpoint of, okay, we know that our guy made this mistake, whatever that mistake was, they made it. But why did they make it? Don't try to argue that they didn't make the mistake. Try to find out why they made that mistake and try to figure out who else was involved in their failure. And then that's the way that you can then really do the best job of defending your position. At least this is from the defense side. And honestly, the plaintiff side, it's getting people to understand that there's the mistake. There's what happened. Don't, leave yourself, be good, be reasonable, be willing to talk. But if the starting point is, the Titanic didn't sink, you have problems. You have problems. So, look, the boat sank. Okay. We know it hit an iceberg. So now let's just start realistically talking about, what the result of that is. And people I think oftentimes want to just be so set on that win that we're going to get 100% defense verdict that a lot of times they really provide bad information. And I see the same thing on the plaintiff side. It's overreaching in a case just to try to get 27 subcontractors in the case. And at the end of the day, you don't have, anything on half of them except ill will coming back at you, in a big giant team effort. So to me, it's being reasonable.
It's keen observation and sage advice. Thank you so much, Craig, for joining me here today.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much.
And thank you very much to our listeners for joining us for another discussion at the Roundtable. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, Discussions at Roundtable. Our show notes are available on our website, roundtablegroup.com. Subscribe today on Apple Podcasts.